the year of when the Rebbe was keeping Avelos for the Rebbetzin, and the Rebbe was not very happy about it. And this was one of the things the Rebbe answered, amongst others, about saying Slichas close to Sof Zman Krishma. So we don't wait till the very, very last minute. The whole idea is waking up early. We say, talking now about Slichas, how we woke up early. Shachar Kamti is one of the expressions in Slichas. I woke up early. So it might not be Ashmeres Aboika Mamash, but at least the general idea that it's early. Moving on from Slichas, I'm moving on to Erev Shashana. One of the things that we do on Erev Shashana is Hataras Nadarim. Hataras Nadarim al Pidin is enough to have 3 people. You don't need more than 3 people for Hataras Nadarim. 3 people besides for the person that wants to be Matar Neder. It is our minig, not in all circles that we have this minig. It is our minig that we have 10 people for Hataras Nadarim. Some people explain the reason for the minig of having 10 people because it says in Hataras Nadarim that were Matar Neder Nadarim that were said b'hakets when we were awake, and Nadarim that were made b'chaloim in a dream. And the halacha is that a neder which is made in a dream needs to have 10 people to be Matar Neder. The problem with that explanation is that in our Siddur, the Alter Rebbe does not write the words bein b'chaloim. It doesn't say that we're being Matar Neder Nadarim of a dream. So it's difficult. We still could say that it's referring to those 2, even though we don't say that, but it's a bit difficult to say that the reason why we have 10 people is because of the idea that we're being Matar Nadarim that were made in a dream. Another explanation why 10 people, because we definitely want to have an Eidah Shleim, a complete minion of people. The Rebbe explains because we want to have the Eskalus, Atem, Nitzavim, Hayom, Kulchem, Lefnei Hashem, Lekechem, the Eskalus of all types of Jews. When we have a minion represents all 10 different types of Jews, like it says in the beginning of Parshas Nitzavim, Reshechem, Shetechem, the list of 10 different types. And that's one of the ideas why we have 10 people. But there's a common error over here. Even in this case, where it's about having a minion of people, the minion does not include the person that's making, unlike a regular minion, the minion does not include the person that's saying the Hataras Nadarim. It's 10 people besides for him. So again, according to halacha, 3 is enough, and some people have difficulty arranging 10 people. It's only a matter of minig. It's better to do Hataras Nadarim with 3 than not doing it at all. But if you can get 10 people, then it's better to have 10 people. Relatives are included for Hataras Nadarim too. Any 10 people in the audience is okay for Hataras Nadarim. Now it's important to understand what we're saying in Hataras Nadarim, and without understanding what we're saying in Hataras Nadarim, it has 0 meaning whatsoever. Hataras Nadarim, the Pesach, some people think is a tchina. It's a supplication, a tchinas. So, women would often say tchinas when they ben shlich. This is another prayer. It's not a prayer. We're actually asking for a bezdin to annul our vows. And if a person doesn't understand what he's saying, the whole Hataras Nadarim doesn't work. You don't actually have to understand word for word in the Hataras Nadarim. The main idea should be piv libay shavim, that your mouth and your heart should be equal. You should want to be Matar Neder. As long as you read the translation in advance, you don't have to actually get one of those linear translations that make sure you understand every word for word, every single word. You read the translation in advance, you know the basic gist of what he's saying right now, then it's okay for Hataras Nadarim. There's another aspect of Hataras Nadarim. One is that we're asking the bezdin to annul our neder, and then we're doing a Mesiras Meidah. We're making an announcement about the future. And the announcement about the future is we're making a declaration that all future nedarim should be annulled as well. Now we cover all our bases. We do Hataras Nadarim, Erev Shashana, we do Mesiras Meidah, we announce about our future nedarim, and we're even doing a Kol Nidre as well. But that doesn't necessarily absolve us from the need to do a proper Hataras Nadarim if a person is actually aware of a neder. Hataras Nadarim is not for the nadarim that you actually know. If a person knows that he made a specific neder, or a minik toiv that he did 3 times, and he wants to annul it, do not rely on Hataras Nadarim, because it's halacha that a person is mechuyev lefaret haneder. You're mechuyev to tell the bezdin your specific neder that you made. Hataras Nadarim doesn't have a list of nadarim. It just has a blanket, generic lashon that we use for all nadarim in general. But if you know of a specific neder that you know that you took upon yourself, a minik toiv, either you took upon a minik to do forever, the very fact that you took on a minik forever, or you didn't even take it on forever, but you already practiced it 3 times and you didn't say beli neder, it already becomes binding, and therefore Hataras Nadarim is required, and you can't rely just on Hataras Nadarim Shashana, which doesn't have the pirut haneder, doesn't have the neder specified, the specific neder. Which is why it's so important every time we take an achlata. You'll find them in the Rebbe's letters, you'll find them all over in Svarim, you'll find them in Likutei Torah, in Halacha. that whenever you take on a new minhag Torah, you always should say, spell out, specify in your mind or verbally, beli neder. I'm not taking someone with the force of a neder. I really want to do it, but it shouldn't be like a neder. That doesn't mean that I'm not planning on doing it. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be binding. It's binding, but not like a neder. Same with the Mesidas Meidah. Even the phrase that we use, the second section of Ataras Nadarim, that we're announcing about the future Nadarim, Shulchan Aruch also tells us they're really not supposed to rely on that. Only Manush L'Tzayda Gadol under certain conditions to rely on the Mesidas Meidah. So therefore, the Chatchila, both of these things don't work. We're doing it as an extra base to cover ourselves before the Yom Adin, because Nadarim are one of the most severe things in Torah. We don't want to have Chas v'Shalom, that sin of Nadarim upon us before it comes to Yom Adin. So we want to cover ourselves and we remove whatever we can, at least, from the end of Nadarim. One of the big questions about Hashanah is always about the menu. Everybody likes talking about the menu. Which foods are acceptable, which foods you can't have. So, brought down a poskim that we don't use vinegar, we don't cook, even though there's a meaning that we eat fish on Rosh Hashana, and normally, ordinarily, I guess they would cook fish in vinegar. I don't hang out in the kitchen, I don't know the recipes and the ingredients, but this is what's brought down halacha. But when it comes to the Shashana, we don't cook our fish in vinegar, which isn't only about fish, it's a general thing that we don't eat sour foods when it comes to the Shashana. That includes pickles, sour pickles are sour. The fact that it tastes good is irrelevant. What's negative here, that the sourness is not a good omen when it comes to the time of the Shashana, when we want to have a sweet omen, a positive omen. Garlic is not included. It says clearly in Poskim, an earlier Poskim, already in the Kolbe, one of the Rishonim, it says about a minute to eat garlic on a Shashana. Garlic is fine. Garlic is not considered sour. It might be sharp, but it's not sour. Sharp foods are not included. Cherein is included just because there's a sourness to cherein as well. It also has a sourness besides for the sharpness. And it doesn't mean you can't have vinegar in your food. It means you shouldn't have food which the vinegar taste is detected. So you can mix a bit of vinegar into a food. You can have vinegar mixed into the mayonnaise, whatever it is, as long as it doesn't have a sour, the general taste is not a sour taste. In addition to the idea of not having, some people took this in a very extreme way, and some people don't have soda on Rosh Hashanah because they're worried about the gassy taste of the soda or seltzer or something like that. But that's, again, all these things are not the general meaning. Some people don't want to have l'chaim on Rosh Hashanah. It wasn't meaning not to say l'chaim on Rosh Hashanah, not because of the sourness, because of the emas hadin, because of the fear of Rosh Hashanah. It's not a time to sit and say l'chaim. And the Rebbe said about this meaning about not saying l'chaim, that by the table of the Friedig Rebbe, he's not going to say l'chaim, because he doesn't want to change the meaning of his shver of his father-in-law. But by the Fabrengen, the Rebbe says, I will say. The Rebbe by the Fabrengen would say l'chaim. But by the table, with the Sudas upstairs, the Rebbe didn't want to change the meaning of the Friedig Rebbe not to say l'chaim. There is still this vegilu berada. The Shana has both aspects. It's a Yom Tov, and we rejoice because it's a Yom Tov, and at the same time it's berada. It's the fear, it's the trembling of the Yom Adin of Rosh Hashanah. And there's a lot of minhagim that we do. It says we eat and drink, but we don't overeat because we shouldn't forget that it's the spirit of the day. This is constantly in Shulchan Aruch, in Poskim, in Sefer Chassidus, Sefer Halacha. They always talk about the balance of both aspects. It has both elements. We're being judged, but we're being judged in front of our Father, so we're pretty good. We get dressed and we put nice clothing and we wash ourselves and we shower ourselves and we take haircuts. Why? Because we know we're going to win the Yom Adin. But at the same time, it is a Yom Adin. And the Al Pi Chassidus, especially the whole idea of Kabbalah Samalchus, represents the idea of Kabbalah oil, but Kabbalah Samalchus is done with Teich Simcha. We crown the king. So it has, again, both elements in it. So going back to what we were talking about before, L'chaim is not because of the sourness, but the issue of L'chaim is because it just doesn't fit in with the spirit of the Shashana. But the Rebbe said by the Fabrengen, he did say L'chaim. In addition to that, there's a meaning that we don't eat nuts on a Shashana. The different reasons brought in Poskim. One of the reasons, which is more commonly known, although the Alter Rebbe does not bring this reason, is that the word egois, which means nut, is b'gematria chet, and we don't want to mention sin even in a gematria. Chet is sin, and it's famous that one of the Polish Rebbe said that a lot of people are scared of the gematria of chet, but they're not so scared of the chet itself, of the sin itself. They're scared of the gematria of egois. So it's important that you get a lot of shots about this kind of nut and that kind of nut. Okay, these are all sided. What about this kind of chet and that kind of chet? That's also critical to know. But we'll talk about this too. And the second reason why not to eat nuts, and this is the reason that the Alter Rebbe brings, because nuts is marbe kicha v'niya, causes a person to cough. It causes all kind of when a person has stuff coming out of his mouth, when he eats a lot of nuts, and that disturbs a person's davening, disturbs others' davening, and therefore we shouldn't eat nuts. Some people have this meaning only at Shashana. Some people continue this meaning into the second day of Shashana. Some people continue meaning to the both with the sour foods and with the nuts. And some people continue all the way till Yom Kippur, or all the way till Hashanah Rabbah. And that's a question of a family minig. There's no official Chabad minig one way or another. I believe the Kama Chabad minig is, as far as I know, the Famatzi Yom Kippur onwards. For sure, no problem, maybe even earlier. Some people only Erev Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashana, and Erev Yom Kippur. They were particular about these kind of manhagim. Never mind, every Kippur has its own list of menu of foods, which according to halacha, not only a matter of minig, which you're allowed to eat in Erev Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to eat in Erev Yom Kippur, but we're not covering Erev Yom Kippur right now. Shkedim, almonds are not nuts. We might consider them in the family of nuts. I have no idea. I don't know the botanical characteristics, but according to Torah, it's not considered a nut. It's not in the family of egoism. And therefore, if you're looking at the gematria aspect, shkedim doesn't fit in with egois and doesn't have that gematria. It's a different food altogether. But if you're looking at the idea that it makes a person cough, that applies to almonds too. And therefore, and that's the primary reason, the reason which Alter Rebbe brings, and therefore we don't need almonds on Rosh Hashanah also. But certainly if you're having ground almond flour, which people put that in cakes and things like that, so it's both not causing the coughing, and it's not doesn't have that gematria, then for sure that wouldn't be a problem. This year, moving away from the menu, which we hopefully would have prepared on night of Rosh Hashanah, so if I'm moving to the night of Rosh Hashanah, we mentioned that Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbos, and if a lot of things are different. As a general rule, it's important that we, Rosh Hashanah, Seres Mitzvah, Yom Kippur, we put our finger on the machzor, we really clearly daven from a siddur in the machzor all the time, and if it's Seres Mitzvah, we make sure that we daven properly and we don't make mistakes. There's so many mistakes that people can make. They mix out a Milcha Kodesh and a Kela Kodesh. I forgot to say Anenu and some Gedalia. And this year, especially with Shabbos, you have to keep on adding things for Shabbos. It's important not to go into mistakes because these mistakes keep on creating new sets of problems. I'll just mention an interesting story. My grandfather, Olav Shalom, was in Munkac. The second time we're quoting the Munkac show today. On Tzom Gedalia, remember I said earlier there were late minyanim in Munkac, so here's a story from a late minyan. There was a late minyan on Tzom Gedalia, and he was there in the shul, and the Munkac Rebbe, the Minchas Elazar, walked into shul, and my grandfather was standing right near the Minchas Elazar, and this was a Milah Chazar Sashatz. It's one of the late minyanim that was like 770 style. Late, we don't mean over here late like when you're not allowed to daven anymore. I'm talking about when you're allowed to still daven, but not an early minyan. Minchas Elazar davened way earlier, but this was a late minyan happening. He walked inside the shul, in Milah Chazar Sashatz, and he screams out loud, and my grandpa was standing right next to him. He just walked right near my grandpa, who was a bacher still, and he said, "Ma du gezukt anayni?" Did they say Anenu, the prayer of Anenu in Tzom Gedalia, in Chazar Sashatz? And nobody knew. They didn't have cell phones those times during Chazar Sashatz, but people's minds ripped off. And he started screaming, "Atug nuch Rosh Hashanah," a day after Rosh Hashanah. And we don't know. The day after Shashana, this is how Chazar Sashatz looks like. And interesting, because my grandfather was standing next to him, it looked like he's screaming at my grandfather, although he had nothing to do with the story. So in order to appease him, after the fast, he called him over and he asked him to come to his house to break the fast in his house, to appease him for the fact that he screamed at the minyan, which was standing next to my grandfather. And getting back to our point over here, it's important not to make any mistakes, not to forget things. Not on the day after Shashana. We should be following carefully the siddur and not make sure we don't make mistakes. And some of these mistakes are really problematic because you're stuck. It's a question if you go back or you don't go back. If you go back, might be berachah batal. If you don't go back, maybe you weren't here to davening. And sometimes it's not so clear cut, and to resolve the question is not that easy. But we'll go through a couple of things. We don't sing Avinu Malkeinu. Chabad meaning is to sing Avinu Malkeinu before davening on Rosh Hashana. Generally, that was the Rebbe's minig. On Shabbos, the Rebbe didn't do that because we don't say Avinu Malkeinu if we don't sing Avinu Malkeinu. In the siddur, there's things that we're supposed to add specifically for Shabbos, and again, it's important to highlight those in advance. One of the things is that in Ma'ariv for Shashana, there's a special bracha that we always say on Shabbos, the bracha of Me'in Sheva, which is a summary of all 7 brachas. Magen Avos B'dvarei, and we say that on Shashana too, and this time we don't say like we say Holy or Kela Kadosh, we say Melech HaKadosh. When we come home from shul, normally Friday night we say Shalom Aleichem, Eshes Chayil, all of that. The current Chabad meaning, the reason I'm saying current Chabad meaning because it was changes over the years, is that we say Shalom Aleichem, Eshes Chayil, all of that. We say all of that quietly. Till the actual Kiddush, we say everything quietly. I don't know about. I was asked a question about singing the Nigan Azama B'Shvachim or Asadlu Sudasa Friday night and Shabbos day. Do we do that quietly? Do we not do that? There's nothing written about that. I would assume, as far as I know, people just don't say it at all. A lot of people never say those midas on a Friday night and Shabbos day. And in Sefer HaMahagim, it's brought down from the Rabbeim that Lav Daf, you should be saying it all together. You have to really say it properly. It depends if you're a Baal Madregi and not a Baal Madregi. There's a whole discussion there about that. That there's something called that if you're only saying it because you're supposed to say it, then that's not really called said. So since Azam, the Rabbeim didn't necessarily say Azam Meshvach and Asad Zadas even on a regular Shabbos, certainly in a Shabbos like this, where even the parts that we say quietly, and the minig used to be we don't even say those parts altogether. The original Chabad minig was not to say Shalom Aleichem, none of that. It was changed in Tafshin Yud Zayin that we say it quietly. That's when the Rebbe made the change on the Hayom Yom. So I would assume we shouldn't say Azam Meshvach altogether. Go back to Kiddush. In Kiddush, we say the Shabbos Dig Kiddush, obviously. And because on the first night of Shashana is a minhag to eat a pomegranate, so in the Sheffiano of Kiddush, we should have in mind to exempt, we shouldn't have to make a separate Sheffiano on the pomegranate, it's a Shiloh of Sheffiano, if it's a Shiloh of Sheffiano, some didn't have the Sheffiano before, pomegranate before. So the Sheffiano, which is for Kiddush, could also cover the Rimain. If you need to make a Sheffiano on the Rimain. I'm talking now about I'm up to the first night of Shashana, but one of the special foods that we eat is a Rimain, so we should multiply, our marriage should multiply like the seeds in a pomegranate. It's enough, even if the Rimain is on the table, or if you had in mind that you're going to have a Rimain. But if it wasn't on the table and you didn't have in mind, then you have to make a special Sheffiano on that. Some people, Dafka, don't want to make a separate Sheffiano on that because they argue that Sheffiano with Kiddush is for Yom Tov. The Rimain is for the fruit, and we don't want to cover two things with the same Sheffiano if we don't have to. But that wasn't the Rebbe's minig, and it's enough rice or posting that we can use the same Sheffiano for both and cover the Rimain with the Sheffiano and Kiddush. The Kiddush, like we said, is a Shabbos Kiddush for the first night. The second night, the Kiddush is going to be different. It's a Yak Nahas Kiddush. It's a Kiddush with Havdalah. It's Be'er Pri Agafen, the Kaddish Yisrael Yom HaZikaron, Be'er Meir Ha'esh, Hamavud Me'Kiddush L'Kodesh, and Sheffiano, Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah Zman. But the first night is Yom HaShishi, Be'er Pri Agafen. After Kiddush, we wash, and only then we eat the apple and honey. The second night, we're going to eat a new fruit that's going to be right after Kiddush. The first night, we're going to first wash, and only after washing and eating challah do we go and have the apple and honey. And the reason is very simple. The reason for this distinction. Apple and honey is not really critical to have after Kiddush. It has nothing to do with Kiddush. Apple and honey, it's a good simon. Apple has a good simon of sweetness, and honey has a simon of sweetness. So we want to have the simon in the beginning of the meal. So first we make Kiddush. Kiddush is always supposed to be b'makam suda. So right after Kiddush, we wash for challah. And the beginning of the meal, after we eat a bit of challah, then we move on to the apple and honey. We want to do the middle of the meal not to make a break between Kiddush and the meal and the Hamoitzi. Also, because apple and honey might require the tilas yadayim, because it's something which is dipped in liquid. So we might as well do it after the Tilas Yadayim and after Hamoitzi. In contrast, on the second night, we're eating a new fruit because there's a suffix if you're supposed to make Sheffiano on the second night of Shashana. There's a machlokes rishonim. If the second night of Shashana is the same as every Yom Tov will make another Sheffiano both nights. Both nights of Pesach, both nights of Sukkot, both nights of Shavuos, because it's a suffix which day is really Yom Tov. The Shashana, where it's considered one long day, Yom HaRichter, we're not going to go into the whole discussion right now, and therefore there's a question whether you should make a Sheffiano, or we could be happy with the Sheffiano we made the first night, because it's a machlokes. So in order to cover the Shaila, the woman who bench licht, and the man who make Kiddush, and the Baltakei who blows shofar, all make sure they have either a new garment or a new fruit to cover the Sheffiano. So women bench licht close as possible. Either they get themselves a new garment, and therefore they can make Sheffiano the second night by licht benching, and it'll cover the new garment that they got for the Shashana, and they wear it the second night. Alternatively, they make it right close to Kiddush, and then they'll have the new fruit right after Kiddush. And the Baal Tekeya gets a new garment that he has by Tkiyas. This year, the Baal Tekeya is exempt from having a new garment for Tkiyas, because this year there's no Tkiyas on the first day of Shashana. So we didn't have the Sheffiano on Tkiyas the first day, so you could directly make a Sheffiano on the second day for Tkiyas Shofar. So let's go back now to the new fruit. So the new fruit that we're going to be having on the second night, that is part of Kiddush. We said a Sheffiano in Kiddush, and we want to make sure that the Sheffiano isn't only for the Yom Tov in case it doesn't need a Sheffiano. We want to also have a new fruit. So we want to have the new fruit right after Kiddush before the meal. So that's why the second night, the minig is different. The first night, the apple and honey is eaten in the beginning of the meal, not the break between Kiddush and the meal. The second night that we're eating a new fruit, that has a side of sweetness. We're eating a new fruit for Sheffiano, which Sheffiano is in Kiddush. We do it right after Kiddush. And it is our minig to eat a full shear of fruit. Sometimes those new fruits don't particularly taste very, very pleasant. So you don't have to have a kazayas of the new fruit. You could eat a tiny bit of the new fruit, which you make Sheffiano, and add a kazayas to some other fruits. The Chalal, the Rebbe Rishab had a meaning that it was mahader on the second night to eat a lot of fruit. Not only Sheffiano fruit, even fruits which don't qualify for Sheffiano, fruits that he has eaten before, just to eat more fruit. So you can eat other fruits to be mashal to the shir. We eat a full shir, then we make a bracha achreina on the fruit, whether bird of fashos or ala eitz, depending if it's a fruit from the Shivas Aminim or not from the Shivas Aminim. But we don't make ala geffen on the wine, and that we allow the benching that we'll have later will cover the wine, because the wine is part of the meal, is connected as kiddush for the meal, and therefore that's covered with benching. So back to so that's the difference between the apple and honey and the new fruit. But I'm going to move back to the apple and honey. Some people have trouble with having honey. Either they're allergic to honey, or they just don't like honey, whatever it is, and they can't force themselves. So there are people that have the minute to have sugar instead. Interesting, there's a Sephardi minute to actually have a cooked apple, cooked in sugar, instead of dipping an apple in honey. And it's okay to take the apple and dip it into sugar if you can't dip it into honey. It's also something that's brought down the person. It's definitely better than nothing, and it has a chshivas. Very interesting. I don't know why, but there was a big, heavy debate over the years by the Rabbeim if the dessert on the first night of Shashana is covered by the bracha on the apple and honey. You make an eitz in the beginning of the meal, and you're going to be having dessert, kompot, in the end of the meal. And dessert is often eitz. I don't know why it was so critical to have kompot. Why to have dessert all together? Why the dessert had to be kompot? But for whatever reason that was, and it was always a debate: do you actually make a new bracha on the kompot, or you already made a bracha on eitz? And the final decision is, after the back and forth, is that the bracha eitz that we make on the apple, we have in mind it should cover not only the apple, it covers the rimay that we eat later, and it covers the dessert that we're going to be having at the end of the meal. The Rebbe would cut a tiny piece of the apple and leave it for the end of the meal and eat it later together with the kompot. So that's sort of like an extension of that, and not make a special eitz on that. The second night, we have a whole different system. Like we said, we have a new fruit. What qualifies as a new fruit? A new fruit means any seasonal fruit which grows either once a year or twice a year. It's a fruit that has a season. It doesn't grow a whole year. And because it's a seasonal fruit, you have it sometimes you don't have the fruit that you have available in the summer, and they're summer fruits. And they're not really regularly available. They're seasonal fruits, and you haven't had it yet in this season, then you can make it a Sheffiano. Even though nowadays a lot of fruits are very, very common, they're still not available as readily available, and they're not as fresh. Like we know that in the stores you can't find normally plums and peaches in the winter the way you can find them in the summer. So any fruit which is a seasonal fruit which grows by the season, and you haven't had it yet in the season, you can make it a Sheffiano. If you don't have a Sheffiano fruit, you still make Sheffiano. Although we said earlier that the reason we say Sheffiano is because of a suffix. The reason when we have a new fruit because of a suffix, we can make Sheffiano the second night. But if you don't have a new fruit, the same for Baal Tekeya. Not this year, but in general, a Baal Tekeya who doesn't have a new garment, a Baal Tekeya will make Sheffiano without a new garment. When we go with Tzayim, and on the second day of Shashana, we'll make with them a Sheffiano, regardless of whether they have if If you have a new garment, you don't have a new garment. So likewise, when it comes to the new fruit, back to Kiddush or Lichbenchen, if you have a new fruit, if you have a new garment, you don't have a new garment, we include the Sheffiano in the Kiddush regardless. The minig is, although it's not really necessary, all those who heard Kiddush don't have to eat the new fruit. They heard the Sheffiano, they're covered. They said answer Amen for Sheffiano. The person who made the Sheffiano, who wants to be covered, he also takes the new fruit. Everybody else doesn't have to have a new fruit, but the meaning is everybody takes the new fruit. And the meaning is they make their own bracha, and this is part of the siman toy for the new year. They're eating a new fruit, they're making a bracha on it. So much so that the Eshel Avram, not the Prima God, not the Eshel Avram, the B'chasher of Talmud of the Badikshar, says that it's better not to be yotze the Sheffiano on the fruit on the person making Kiddush and make your own Sheffiano. And that is indeed the minute. We hear Sheffiano for the person making Kiddush, and then when we have the whole fruit, we make Sheffiano when it's on the fruit ourselves. First night in benching, we say that saying Yal V'Yaveh. First day that's saying Yal V'Yaveh. And the second day, it's only Yal V'Yaveh. Yal V'Yaveh has a different halacha the night of the Shashana and the day of the Shashana. It's not the same halacha. If a person forgets Yal V'Yaveh in benching, by night, you have to bench over again. Depends where you remember. If you remember before you say Hashem's name, you can always go back and say Yal V'Yaveh. If you finish a bracha, B'nei V'rach B'nei Shalom, there's a special bracha that you're supposed to say, which is printed in the Siddur, in the bencher. But if you already start the next bracha, the bracha Vateva Meitiv, you said, but even just the word Baruch, so if it's night time in Hashanah, you have to go back and bench again, and start again from the beginning of benching. By day of Shashana, you don't go back for Yal V'Yaveh. And the reason is because there are opinions in Rishonim that you're supposed to fast on Hashanah, you're not supposed to eat on Hashanah. So we can't go back on Yal V'Yaveh if maybe you didn't have to say Yal V'Yaveh, you didn't even have to eat, according to some opinions. And we take into account that opinion that we're not going to go bench again, we missed Yal V'Yaveh. That only applies to the day. By night, certainly you have to eat. Even those placements say you're allowed to fast, and you're supposed to fast on Hashanah, they don't say that about the night. So by night you go back on Yal V'Yaveh, and by day you don't go back. This year we also have Ritzei as part of benching, and that makes it interesting because even though by night, by day of the Shashana, there's a difference between that. Yeah, we wouldn't go back for Yal V'Yaveh, but for Ritzei you would go back. So if a person forgets Ritzei, he will go back. But if he forgets Yal V'Yaveh, he won't go back. And if he forgets both and he goes back, he says, of course, he says Ritzei and Yal V'Yaveh. It's brought down in halacha that one is not supposed to sleep on Rosh Hashana. And if this person sleeps, it says his mazel is asleep, v'chulu. But a lot of people take that to mean that you shouldn't sleep in the afternoon of Rosh Hashana. When in the afternoon of Rosh Hashana, it's not so bad to sleep because it says after tkiyas, after davening, it's more lenient to sleep. Really, day means before midday, before davening is over. So ideally, although a lot of people are not makbid about this, but ideally it's brought down to some svarim. A person should wake up early on Rosh Hashana before it becomes day, before Leis HaShachar. And a lot of people are very makbid about that. There's room to justify those who don't wake up early because they're not going to sleep on Rosh Hashana. They're just still sleeping. But we shouldn't rely on that. Anyhow, Rosh Hashana is one of those days of Hashkama, the special days that you're supposed to wake up early. Rosh Hashana is a day that we really don't want to be stuck in bed sleeping. It's a day that we're preparing for such a special holy day. So we should wake up as early as we can. There's a din in Shulchan Aruch every day. The very first beginning of Shulchan Aruch, it says a person should wake up before Leis HaShachar. That's the very first sefer in Shulchan Aruch. Nowadays, we're not particular about that. Somebody was very makbid about this halacha, and they asked him, why are you so particular about this halacha? So he said, when you get tested and you fail the very first question, that's not good news. They're going to test me on my behavior. They're going to start with the beginning of Shulchan Aruch. The very first sefer is, wake up early before Leis HaShachar. I fail that sefer, I'm terrible. So he was very particular about this. So there's explanations why nowadays we're not particular about it. Nowadays, like we said, we have electricity, we go to sleep late, we wake up late. There's explanations that we don't wake up too late as long as we wake up, relatively speaking, early. The Frierdiker Rebbe once spoke about the importance of waking up before 7 o'clock a.m. He said very sharp language about Chassidim who wake up past 7 in the morning. He even said something to the effect they're not considered like Chassidim, they're out of the club. So about waking up late, and this is after 7 in the morning. But this is all about the rest of the year. But if this is Din Shulchan Aruch like that, at least Rosh Hashanah, the very first day of the year, we should really wake up as early as we can, and preferably before Alis HaShachar. Before davening, so before Tkiyas, generally we don't eat. This year, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, there's no Tkiyas. For those who have to eat because they can't have Kavanah and davening, if they're hungry and thirsty and it's going to affect their Kavanah and davening, they're allowed to eat throughout the year, like it says in Halacha. And with the Rabbeim, we're very makbid about it, that people shouldn't be machmir in this Halacha, that since according to Halacha, if somebody is hungry or thirsty and it affects his Kavanah, he's allowed to eat it. Not, you don't understand eat before davening, but if it affects your Kavanah. So the first day of Rosh Hashanah, when there's no Tkiyah Shofar, it's the same as the rest of the year. The Shofar, we don't move around on Rosh Hashanah. On Shabbos Rosh Hashanah, it's like every other Shabbos. You're not supposed to move the Shofar. It's muktzah. Some poskim say that in our generation, when people don't use shofars for anything else, it's not stam klisha malachta l'isser. It's an extreme level of muktzah. Muktzah machmas chesarik, because you shouldn't move it at all, even if you need the place. But it's still an option. You could always move it begufa. You could pick it up like this with your elbows. You could push it like that if the shofar is laying around. Why don't we blow shofar on Shabbos? Al pi nigla, shofar is a shvus, uvdun dechel. Shofar has in it a problem that it's a weekday activity. Every Rosh Hashanah, of course we do it. Chazal didn't put their rule of uvdun dechel not to do weekday activities, which is those halachas that we're learning right now in Rambam 3 Perakim a day, in the place of the mitzvah sev Rosh Hashanah. But when it of Tkiyah Shofar, but when it falls on Shabbos, in addition to the idea of uvdun dechel of the weekday activity, is a concern that some people might end up carrying their shofar in the Rishus Rabban. And carrying is a very serious problem to carry on Shabbos. Chazal stopped a lot of rules to prevent people from carrying on Shabbos. And if they made a rule, they cut out the mitzvah of shofar in the Torah, which they're allowed to do that, because it doesn't say the Torah beferish if it falls out of Shabbos. If it would say the Torah beferish the words if it falls out of Shabbos, they wouldn't change the rule, like the Taz explains. But Chacham could tell you not to do a rule. Sheva al Tasa, they tell you to refrain from doing something, even if it's a Torah rule, they have a koyach to do that in order to prevent that people should carry on Shabbos. Like the Rebbe explains, that this is what it says in Chassidus, that Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah, we have the Tkiyah Shofar by itself. The Shabbos itself gives us the power of Tkiyah Shofar, is because there's nothing in the world that could stop something which is a shleimus of a Yid. And if the Eibush set up a calendar system, where because of this calendar system, and because of human weakness, there's a concern about blowing Shofar, and therefore we can't blow Shofar on Shabbos, the can since the entire world was created for Eden, and the calendar was created for Eden, and human condition was created for Eden, must be that it can't be anything which will be a chesara by Eden. Obviously, we can't be missing out the mile of shofar. We obviously have the mile of shofar. Shabbos itself accomplishes what shofar accomplishes. And there's many explanations about this in Chassidus, and I encourage people to learn them. I'm wondering about Shashana Shachalis, but Shabbos particularly for this year. There's one fascinating sikh of the Rebbe, Shabbos Parshas Nitzavim Tashim Mem Tes, and it's also Michtav Klali, a pastoral letter that the Rebbe wrote to Klal Yisrael, that the idea of shofar is bittul, and there's two types of bittul. One of where we blow shofar to crown the king, and a higher form of bittul is that we don't even blow shofar, because if we're blowing shofar, we're doing an act of bittul. There's someone that's having bittul to the king. Not doing anything is the total bittul, we don't even blow shofar. That's a much higher level of bittul. Of course, even higher level of that is the Beis Hamikdash, where you blow shofar even on Shabbos. That's even a high madrega. Mitzvah Shem will have it this year too. I'll mention some of the halachas of shofar for the second day. The Baltakei is supposed to learn the halachas of Tkiyah Shofar. There's a special maimer that says you should learn to understand the kavanas of Tkiyah. The maimer at some Matzoyim have it printed there. Otherwise, it's printed in the siddur called Siddur Dach. And even someone who's going with Tzayim and blowing Shofar should also learn the maimer. And in addition to the much more important topic, which is to learn the halachas of Tkiyah Shofar. There's a lot of halachas about Tkiyah Shofar. The halach is that Shvarim Trua. There's two opinions, but in Tkiyah is the Miyusher, and the primary Tkiyah is we do Shvarim Trua in one breath, but Alter Rebbe says we should make a small break, that it should be obvious what's the Shvarim and what's the Trua. And we blow a minimum of what we call 30 koilos. Tkiyah Shvarim Trua Tkiyah 3 times, Tkiyah Shvarim Tkiyah 3 times, and Tkiyah Trua Tkiyah 3 times. Some people have difficulty with that, but we can't get less than that because that's the bare minimum. 30 koilos. Now, if somebody has no choice, they're not going to let him blow 30 koilos. Okay, so blow only the 10 koilos, tashrat, tashat, tarat, and don't make a brach on it. But really, should really be blowing the 30 koilos. We don't need to blow, if a person is davening b'yechidus or miftzayim or whatever it is, you don't need to blow more than 30, but because it's an Indian to have 100 koilos, during Musaf, we don't blow shofar if we're davening b'yechidus, unlike in shul. But if somebody wants to, after davening, then finish up another 70 koilos to have the full 100 koilos, he can do that. He could also count all the shofar that he does during Miftzayim. If you're blowing shofar b'yechidus, lechatchila you should wait until after Sof Zman Krishma. You're not supposed to blow shofar b'yechidus the Shashana morning, because that's not a time which is a favorable time for blowing shofar if you're not with a minyan. That shouldn't override mitzvah. If you ever know somebody that's going to miss out shofar because of that, you should blow even during those hours. If a bacher is going on mitzvah shofar, it's important to make sure that he's already considered a gadol, that he can be mighty other people with shofar, which means even if he's 13, he might not necessarily have the signs of maturity to be a gadol. He has to have 2 pubic hairs, shtei, and therefore it's important to make sure we have dafka a gadol, someone who's, if he has a full beard, he definitely qualifies. And even on the second day, ideally, one should be machmer as well. If someone is blowing shofar for a woman, then he shouldn't make a bracha. A woman and not mechuyev in shofar. The woman can make a bracha herself, but you shouldn't make a bracha for a woman if you're blowing for her. Or for that matter, if you're blowing for anybody who knows how to make a bracha himself, and you are yotze already, you shouldn't make a bracha for them. If you're being yotze now, of course you can make the bracha. A shofar that's cracked, there's a bunch of halachas about a cracked shofar. I'm not going to go through all the halachas, but what I will mention is that a small chip in a shofar, a chip which is not through and through. So in other words, a shofar could have a crack which goes through and through. So you see the crack on one side and on the other side. But if you sometimes it's a chip that only on the outside, but if you look inside the shofar, you don't see the crack there. That doesn't qualify as a crack or as a hole. You don't have to worry about that at all. This year, the Shashana will be falling on a Shabbos. First day of Shashana, we say Anis Velasi during Mincha. The purpose of Anis Velasi is when a person eats and drinks, we turn to Hashem and we tell him that our eating and drinking should be favorable. Unlike the guy where they eat and drink, they do other things. We come to Shul still, therefore the Hashem is Ratzon, and since we eat and drink on Shashana too, especially if it falls on a Shabbos, we say Anis Velasi, but we don't say Tzidkascha. The reason we don't say Tzidkascha is because in Tzidkascha that we say Shabbos Mincha has the words Mishpatechet Ha'im Rabbah, Hashem's judgment. We don't want to talk about judgment on Yom Adin. And it's Rosh Chodesh. We never said Tzidkascha on Rosh Chodesh. On the second night in davening, we add the special tefillah of Atoy Diyenu. It's very important that the second night we have to make Havdalah. No melacha should be done preparing for the second night until the Zman, and until you said Baruch HaMavdul Ben Kodesh LeKodesh, or you daven Ma'ariv and you said the words of Atoy Diyenu, which is like Atachon Yom Tov. Tashlich is not done on the first day of Shashana. It's pushed off. Now, originally, the Alter Rebbe does not write this anywhere. And if you look in the Mekubalim, they also tell us that Tashlich should be done on Rosh Hashana. It shouldn't be pushed off. But nonetheless, the meaning became that when Rosh Hashana is on Shabbos, you push off Tashlich. The Rebbe once spoke at length about this, and he said that this meaning became only in the later generations when they actually saw that people are being nichshel and they're carrying machzorim and sidurim on Shabbos. And you're not allowed to carry on Shabbos. So therefore, even though we're not allowed to make our own new gzeiros, the Rebbe said we can make gzeiros for something that might happen. But when we saw a actual takala that people are carrying on Shabbos, they pushed off tachnim to prevent chas v'shalom, the chil Shabbos that people are carrying on Shabbos. They pushed it off tashlach, not tachnim, to the second day. And even though it's supposed to be on the first day, because it's done al pi Torah, that the Rebbeim arranges al pi Torah and they pushed it off to the second day, like I said, the Alter Rebbe doesn't say to do it like that. But because it was done that way, then Al Pi Torah we accomplished on the second day, the same thing we were supposed to accomplish on the first day. Now Tashlach is said, so like I said, this year on the second day, it's said before Shkia. Before sunset, we say you'd give him Midas Rachmim, which we're never supposed to say midnight altogether. And Bechlal, it's Eis Ratzon to be done after done by day. If a person missed it, it's after Shkia, you should say Tachim and also. If a person missed the Shashana altogether, and you can't say Tashlach, you missed say Tashlach, you can say it after the Shashana, Seres Meit Shuvah. And there's a minig specifically, some places, they had the minig that way, that if a person is not saying Tashlich Rosh Hashana, he should say it on the day called Yom Yud Gimel Midais. There's one day, those who say Slichas, Aseres Meit Shuvah, is one day that they say a special Slichas, Hashem, Kel, Racham, V'chana, it's a Slichas that we say by Ne'ilah. And on that day, the minig is to say Tashlich, which is Ches Tishrei. Normally this year, Ches Tishrei is on Shabbos, so therefore we would, if those who didn't say Rosh Hashana, will say Tashlich on Thursday, Vav Tishrei, the Rebbe Tzachana Ziyar said. The Friedige Rebbe couldn't say Tashlich Rosh Hashana 1 year, so he said it at Rosh Hashana, Matzah Rosh Hashana, and he said it a third time on Yom Yud Gimel Middas on Ches Tishrei. Tashlich, it said, is supposed to be done out of the city. Nowadays, we don't do that. We don't do it out of the city, but we go out of our comfort zone at least. We go out of where we are. We go to, they specially prepared, dug up for the Rebbe a well to do it in the Chatzar of 770. But it should be done in a way of tznius. The main thing of Tashlich is not just to say the words, to throw away our Averis. And certainly during Tashlich, we don't want to get new Averis. And often my tashlich becomes a whole hangout from the pressure, the stress of the day. Tashlich, and this is on the second day, it's even harder. There's a time to let loose. Shouldn't be used out to dvarim b'telim chas shalom for Moshe Bleitzin. How careful we have to be on a Shashana. And the poskim specifically say that women should not go say tashlich in a place where there are men. That's hipechatznius. And out of all days, certainly we don't want to have this in Rosh Hashana. So either a special place for tashlich should be made for women if women want to say tashlich, or they could come say tashlich in a place where men say tashlich in different hours, but it certainly shouldn't be there in times when men are there. I'll mention, I'll just look quickly, there's some questions over here. I'll quickly go through some questions if we cover which questions we covered and didn't. I got some questions here in the chat. Do women need to go to slichas at 1 a.m.? No, they don't have to go to slichas. If they want, they can go to slichas. Why do women not do hataras nedarim and Shashana? There's a number of explanations why women don't do hataras nedarim. Some people ask their husbands to do it for them. One of the reasons is not to create kalas reish ben nedarim. And since it's more common that women make nedarim, at least that wasn't in those days, therefore they didn't want to arrange this hataras nedarim, which will make them treat lightly the whole idea of nedarim. Any other questions here? L'chaim with vodka. I'm trying to understand that question. That's what we were talking about. That. Yeah, one question was here about clothing for Sheffiano. Nowadays we don't make Sheffiano on clothing. That's correct, because nowadays we don't have that same chashivas for new clothing. The meaning is we don't normally make Sheffiano for clothing unless it's a real expensive fur coat or something like that. But nonetheless, if a person has a reason to make Sheffiano anyhow, we could rely on making a new garment Sheffiano, like on the Yom Haledes, that ever says to use a new garment. Berchas Hacham, use a new garment. So we do rely on a new garment in a case where there's a reason to make Sheffiano anyhow. But stamazah, when you get a new garment, we don't normally make Sheffiano. What else was there here? If you say Sheffiano at Lichbenschen and you had in mind a new fruit, do you say Sheffiano again when you eat a new fruit by the Suda? That was a question I was asked. No, you don't say Sheffiano again because you had in mind a new fruit. Why is the first 3 hours of the day not a favorable time to blow shofar b'yichidus? Question I was asked over here. The answer is because it says Hashem during the first 3 hours of the day, he's oisik b'din. Afterwards is a time of chesed for Hashem. So during the time when Hashem is oisik in din, then it's not a good time to blow shofar because we want to do only in a time when it's a time of chesed. How are they going to blow shofar with masks? Beats me. How they blow shofar with masks? I guess it's no different than during eating. You're allowed to take off your mask. So someone told me he had to travel on a plane and he couldn't get his kids to wear a mask. So he bought them food and they ate an entire ride. And during when they're eating, they don't have to wear a mask. So I'm not here to suggest that people should circumvent the laws, but I guess during the moment of shofar, it's okay. The people wearing masks, the only problem is for the Baal Takeya. And I guess you could be socially distant. Someone asked me, another question I was asked about Ma'ira Eish on the second night. So our minig is like this. We make Ma'ira Eish over the candles that we benched for Yom Tov. The Yom Tov Licht, we say Ma'ira Eish on those candles. We don't put the candles together. We don't look at our nails. We just say Ma'ira Eish on that. And we don't say Besamim on Yom Tov. The Simchas Yom Tov does the same job as the Besamim, although we're very upset that our Neshama Yisrael is appeared on Shabbos. But now we have Simchas Yom Tov, that calms us down. We don't need the Besamim. Can you blow? Quickly take this question. We can't do too many questions here. Can you blow for someone else on Mitzrayim before you are Yotza? Yes, you can either be Yotza with the person that you're blowing on Mitzrayim, or you can have in mind not to be Yotza. What other question here? If I got my mezuzah checked, okay, that's a private question. You'll have to ask it over about your question. The Rimain, I thought I touched on this. The Rimain, we make a Sheffiano the Rimain, but we don't have to have it right after Kiddush. We can have it later during the meal. The Sheffiano covers the Rimain later. Someone just wrote to me, we heard a comment that the Rebbe put on a new silk scarf for the Beged Chadash on the second day. That's correct. Someone just wrote a comment on the chat that the Rebbe on Rosh Hashana by Tkiyas, the Derech Klal, the Rebbe had a silk scarf, a thin scarf, and not even a scarf, more like a cloth. And that's what the Rebbe used for his Sheffiano for the new garment. I'll just mention one more thing. The place can tell us that it's very important on B'chalal, never to get angry. Because anger is Mo'er Dinim. The Zohar says when a person gets angry, he loses his neshama and it's switched for a neshama of the Sitra Achra of Klippa. The Rebbe brings the Zohar in a couple of letters where he tells people about Shalom Bayis, the importance of Chas Shalom being machlef in neshama with koiches of Tumah. It's even more important when it comes to Hashanah. We have a lot of halachas that we have to do. We go home. The Ben Ish Chai writes, someone comes to the meal and he sees the meal, the table is not set up. The Balabasa Shtaka set up the table before Yom Tov, so the husband comes home, the table will be set. If he comes home, the table is not set, and he's going to get angry, he defeats the entire purpose. But in these times, to such dinim, it's very important, and now there's a lot of stress going on. There's issues of COVID, there's other issues of stress. Much more important than a lot of these things that we were saying, some of these things, at least I should say, is the idea of having a tranquil, calm, relaxed environment. And if a person has a hard time with that, it's a good idea to just walk away and calm down and relax and not bring chas v'shalom anger into the house. We want to bring about Gula Mitzvah Shleima. Gula Mitzvah Shleima comes through Avos Yisrael. The Rebbe says that the nesoin of our generation is the Indian of Avos Yisrael. And I didn't imagine that when I was talking about the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael, that I have to specify that it means in your own house you should have Avos Yisrael. And this is what's really negay for ikus the Mashiach, dafke for Gula Mitzvah Shleima. We need to encourage Avos Yisrael within our own families, with other people. And David Shol should be zeichet the Gula Mitzvah Shleima and hear the Shofar Gadol from Melech HaMashiach, the ultimate Shofar B'hoya B'yoyma who you talk about Shofar Gadol, and will be zeichet the Zemet the Rebbe who you galenu take from Yad Mamish when Aksirach Sim B'Tov L'Shana Tov M'Sukkah L'Chol HaMishtatfim.
Yasher Keach Gadol Rabbi Braun. If anyone would like the recording, it will be available on YouTube on my channel at El Yosef Yitzchak. Please stay tuned for future events. And again, Yasher Keach Gadol to Rabbi Braun. If there are any questions, I'm sure people could contact the Bezdin privately. Sei gesund, Naksir Chasim Teva, gut gebencht, Shashana Teva Masuka.